Yeah, you should find a comfy spot to settle in for this video because we have a million Marvel Snap cards to talk about. Finally, the floodgates have opened on datamined cards. We've had a big gap. It seems the Marvel Snap team was holding back as long as possible on the December season because there's a cool team up with Marvel Rivals, like Overwatch shooter game coming out in December in the Marvel universe, and we're gonna get some like characters and like art design and stuff celebrating teaming up with that game for its release, including stuff like Galacta here behind me, but we're also gonna see stuff for the January season as well. So 2 months worth of cards, and it feels like maybe some extras on top of that too. Now, as always, you know, these are data mined cards. These are not necessarily final. Sometimes stats do change. I don't expect effects to change at this stage, but you know, number tweak, cost tweak here and there is definitely possible. That said, lately they've been more refined when we see them, and typically they've been sticking to what we expect when the final version lands. So anyway, let's go ahead and talk about all these cards in great detail. Then I will sort of rank them from the ones I think are going to be the best to the worst, which is going to take forever because there's like a million, like I said. But let's kick it off here with Galacta, Daughter of Galactus, and she's a 4/6 that reads, each turn the first card you play at another location reveals with +3 power. So basically play this on turn 4, then on turn 5 you get +3, and on turn 6 you get another +3. Do note this is just going to be once per turn, otherwise it would say at each other location, so it's just like the first one is going to activate, and it can't be on top of Galacta, has to be at one of the other 2 locations. But that is a big stat buff, right? Like that's +6 total. She's already a 4/6. That's 412 in total output for this card. Like that is already awesome. And do note, of course, that stats like that can scale really well with other stuff. You play Galacta on turn 4. You play Iron Man on turn 5. +3 on Iron Man? That's insane, right? So there's like Black Panther as well. I do note it does say reveals with the +3 power. So stuff like Galactus, for instance, he's going to reveal at 9 power, which could really help you make a nice big Galactus with your Galacta. What a cute team up. There's also stuff like Galacta on 4 and then Symbiote Spider-Man on 5. He goes up to 10, and then you play Galactus, he goes up to 9. That's 19 power on that Galactus location. Like that's actually kind of scary and enough to win on its own, right? So there is both like just the raw efficient stat output of this card, which I think a surprising amount of decks will value. And then there's also the like sneaky combo-y, you know, Black Panthers and Galactus type stuff where it just goes crazy, you know, utilizing those stats in a more specific fashion. But I think this card can be good in both of those worlds. It is noteworthy that, you know, the power that it's giving is shifting to other locations, which does add like some degree of predictability to this because the opponent knows like you're not going to be putting that buffed card on top of Galacta because you can't, because it won't work there, right? So they're going to kind of expect your lines elsewhere. Obviously with like Galactus decks, they're probably mathing that out anyway and kind of figuring that out. But in other scenarios, you know, it's like, okay, well, I know they're not going to put the Iron Man on Galacta, so it's like, you know, maybe I don't have to worry about as much power there. This might be the easier location to beat, and can just help them make a little bit better plays because you are sort of signaling what you're doing. Not exactly, because you still have 2 other choices, but, you know, given locations and games and so on, it might really only be one other meaningful option or just game states and so on. So a little bit of a downside there, but I think the just output on this will overwhelm any of that concern. I think ultimately this looks very efficient and a little spooky in some of those exact scenarios, like Symbiote Spider-Man into Galactus. That is actually really terrifyingly big. All right, so moving on to our next card, Bruce Banner, a 2/1. When you end a turn with unspent energy, 25% chance to Hulk out. And that means he just turns into the Hulk, the vanilla Hulk, a 6/12 Hulk. So gains 11 power here. But I gotta say, man, this risk and conditionality on this one is, I think, really tough. I feel like this card's gonna have a hard time getting there. So number one, that 25% chance means there's just gonna be instances where this does not hit, and it's just a 2/1, and it's always a 2/1, and you're super sad. That's not a cumulative 25% chance as written anyway. It's each turn's a fresh roll. You got a 1 in 4, and yes, if you play this on turn 2 and you have a deck that's built towards this, you might get 4 or 5 rolls. If you're doing stuff like Magic, of course, you can get an extra turn in there up to turn 7. And yeah, on average, that means you're going to hit on average, but there will also be games where you don't, and it feels really bad. And on top of that, you have to float energy. You have to have the unspent energy to even get the check, which clearly there are decks that are built for that. High evolutionary decks, of course, have been the staple in that world. But High Evo just does not compete in modern Marvel Snap. It had its moment when it came out, but since then it has not held up well. And I don't think this card gives it a boost. I mean, it's like a little boost, I guess, technically. It's just like another synergy piece, kind of getting towards a critical mass. But the rest of the cards just aren't that competitive, like the Cyclopses of the world and so on. So yes, toss it in with Sunspot. Toss it in with like She-Hulk and Infinite. Build that classic high Evo deck. But does this make it good enough to compete? I don't see how. I mean, frankly, there's a lot of 2-drops that get to 12 power anyway. Stuff like Scream and Morbius and all these cards, they're getting that big already. And they're doing so like more reliably, right? They have some predictability. This is just like a total Hail Mary. And when it fails, it's going to feel really, really bad. And you're also going to have those moments where it's like sometimes you need to make a play that fills your energy. Like you don't want to float. You got to make a decision. And it's like, oh God, dude. It's like for other cards, you know, you're kind of losing a fixed value. It's like, okay, well, I just lose 2 power off Cyclops or whatever. That's fine. I'm not going to get those 2 afflictions. That's not a big deal. For Hulk, it's like, God, this could be an 11 power difference if I miss this roll. But you still got to make good plays sometimes. You still got to fill energy. So ultimately, it's like this kind of costs like 4 energy in a way, like costs with that unspent energy to get a decent card at best. I just don't know if the payoff is there. I almost wish this were like 3 energy and it had some sort of like cumulative effect where each turn it went up by 25%. It's like first turn's 25%, second turn's 50%, third turn 75%, that sort of thing, right? And then you'd at least have like a plan to move towards, and you could kind of control the results. As it stands though, man, that is really tough. Not to mention, like, if you top deck this anytime other than turn 2, it's like, oh God, man, I want to play this on turn 6. I'm going to get 1 roll. Like, that creates some fun moments. There's going to be some high rolls. I'm going to have fun in the videos with that. Like, oh my God, Reed just hit the crazy 1 and 4. Oh my God. But as far as like a card you're reliably playing, I just don't see this getting there, because maybe, that said, maybe High Evo gets some changes. Maybe High Evo gets better. You know, that's the sort of thing they would like buff High Evo's package right as Bruce Banner comes out, and then things change. But as it stands now, I don't think this gets there. So moving on here, we have Doom 2099. This is cool, a new version of Doom. It's a 4/2, and it reads, after each turn, add a Doombot 2099 to a random location if you played exactly 1 card. So we got kind of the Athena treatment, but 1 card instead of 2. You'll see the Doombot 2099, also a 4/2 with ongoing. Your other Doombots and Doom have +1 power. So you play this on turn 4. It has 3 turns to go off, right? Turn 4, because it's on board. After each turn happens, turn 5 and turn 6. So you get 3 Doombot 2099s. All of those Doombots are giving +1 power. Do note they do say your other Doombots and Doom, so they don't give themselves the power. So basically each of those are going to be 4 4s of the 3 that you summon, right? They're getting +2 from the other ones. So 3 4 4s, and Doom himself will be a 4/5 because he benefits from all of these. So that is already a crazy amount of stats for a 4-drop. Like, actually just completely crazy amount of stats for a 4-drop, right? You're talking about a 417 already here, which is just absurd when you play this on like turn 3 as well, right? Like, what on earth? This is so many crazy stats. Now, on top of that, the reading of these Doombot 2099s, most people have surmised, and I agree, that the writing on these, they don't say Doom 2099 and Doombots 2099. So I think they work with regular Doctor Doom as well. This feels like it was written in a very specific way to enable a synergy with regular Doctor Doom. So you can also play Doctor Doom on turn 6, which is 1 exact card, mind you, and get even more Doombots that get even more buffs. Those would each get an additional +3. So you'd have another 3 8-power cards on turn 6 on top of this, which in total is just a crazy amount of stat output. Like, it's kind of nuts how much raw power all of this puts out. And like, yes, it is randomly distributed. Yes, it's like a lot of bodies and stuff, but I feel like it's just going to overwhelm people on efficiency. And, you know, it's just so easy to on curve. Play a 4, play a 5, play a 6, job done, like game over. You know, I've just got a billion power that was just so free and so cheap. And what more can you say about this, right? Like, it just looks really, really good. I mean, there's like some ongoing susceptibility, of course, like enchantresses and stuff, but it's not even that limiting. You know, number one, they won't always get all stacked up. So like an enchantress might only hit one Doombot 2099, not the other two, sort of thing. It's like, it's still a big old pile of stats at the end of the day. So for me, this just looks really, really good. And it's like that classic, just like, this is too many stats for this card to exist in this way. I'm kind of stunned that this is not like a 4-1 or something, or the Doombots aren't a 4-1 in this case, to pull this down just a little, because to me, this looks very nutty. All right, so next up here is Luna Snow, a 3/5. On reveal, add an ice cube to each side of this location. The ice cube is a 1/0. At the start of each turn, get +1 energy, then destroy this if your side is full here. So you and your opponent both basically getting some ramp. We've got a lot of these like 3-cost ramp cards with downsides, Electro, Corvus Glaive. This one has a downside as well, in that your opponent's benefiting, but it's not one that maybe directly impacts you or your deck building as much as, say, like Electro or Corvus Glaive, which both kind of demand you work around them in specific ways. Electro's like, well, maybe I need discard stuff, or can't be too all in on like one game plan. Electro is more like, you know, I got to get rid of this thing, I got to blink it, or I got to have like Dr. Doom and Odin to cover, you know, bases, even though I can only play 1 card per turn. Luna Snow offers you a lot more flexibility and freedom in a ramp package, because you can kind of just do whatever you want and use this as a way to accelerate in, you know, any direction, which is kind of how Wiccan is being used today. This isn't obviously quite as decisive or big as Wiccan, but also doesn't demand you run all that like cheap stuff in your deck necessarily either, like Wiccan does, to make sure you hit his curve. And this comes down earlier, so you can start playing kind of big payoff stuff perhaps sooner, you know, getting those big 5 drops online on turn 4 as opposed to the Wiccan itself. So, you know, this is kind of like a more free or flexible ramp card, which does seem enticing. There's also, of course, the consideration that you can sort of deal with your opponent's ice cube. You know, it gets destroyed if their side is full. So you could run like clog style stuff, like throw a debris in there, a goblin or whatever, and try to fill up their location to remove their ice cube. To me, that kind of feels like doubling down almost too much. And it's like, well, you know, I want this extra energy. I don't want to use it to like deny my opponent. I did all this work and I'm just, you know, trying to like gain this tiny advantage. I think really the logic will instead be like, look, I've built my deck in a way that's going to benefit from this energy way more than my opponent. You know, I have the curve fit, I have the value necessary to fill this energy out, and that's going to make it a payoff for me. I don't necessarily have to worry about denying the opponent with clog or like an Electra or whatever that answers the ice cube. So ultimately, you know, I think I like this card. I do wonder if it's doing enough comparatively to other ramp cards, because ramp decks right now aren't great. Like, there's some good Wiccan decks for sure, but the kind of 3-cost single ramp stuff isn't quite as strong as needed. But maybe this creates that flexibility that kind of pushes it to that next level. And maybe there is some kind of like ramp clog hybrid thing that just works really well, and this somehow like fuses those together perfectly. That's certainly a possibility. All right, next up is Rocket, Raccoon, and Groot. 3/3. You can move this once. After your opponent plays a card here, steal 1 power from it, which do note that's steal, not just gain 1 power. So each time that happens, this is a net swing of 2 power. That could happen, you know, 4 times in one location. That's 8 total power and swing potential in one spot. Which would make this a 3/11. And then, you know, technically you could move it and start all over again and like actually hit it, you know, 4 more times. This could kind of get to a 3/19. I mean, with shenanigans, you could even do more than that. That's not even that crazy. It's like a bounce deck where they're like, you know, dumping a spot and this goes off a few times and you catch the final dump on the final turn again as well. That's really a possibility. But I think more realistically, you know, this is a card that's probably in a net output of like, what? It's probably going to gain like 3 hits a lot of the time or something, making it kind of like a 3/9, which notably is good. Like, that's already really big. And the flexibility to move this is not just a gimmick to potentially catch additional, you know, hits on this, which that is a nice little gimmick. and frankly just a good element. But it's just nice to move things. We know how valuable it can be to shift the power around, to be unpredictable. We've seen that so often with cards like Nocturne, Jeff, even Nightcrawler classically did that. Vision has been good for that too. So cards that can move themselves like that really allow you to make some interesting plays and big moments. And then there's like extra bonus of that surprise factor as well. So this really is like the ultimate Guardians of the Galaxy card, because you don't have to call your shot that one time. You just pick your spot and then go from there. Now, obviously, right, like once this is down, the opponent has that data. They can kind of choose to ignore this Rocket Raccoon and Groot. And sometimes it might feel like, oh, well, it's just a 3/3 because it just ignored it. But think about the value of that disruption and the, like, you know, forcing them to go elsewhere. Sit this next to a Nebula or whatever, for instance. And it's like, okay, you know, pick your poison. Is Nebula going to get buffed, or Rocket and Groot going to go off here, right? So being able to influence your opponent's decisions and then still surprise them when this moves on that final turn. They may not be able to avoid it, especially, again, small decks dumping stuff. Might accidentally go off on this a couple times. So to me, ultimately, this just looks really cool, right? I think this has a lot of like surprise factor, utility factor, and just raw numbers too. It's actually disruptive. There's even an affliction element to this as well, because you're stealing that power. So, you know, that could be a little fuel piece for an affliction deck. On top of all of that, this just looks like a good card in a variety of different settings. So I think this is going to be, you know, one of those potentially like generically good 3-cost cards that just goes in a ton of decks. So then our final Rivals card here is Peni Parker, a 2/3. On reveal, add Spider to your hand. When this merges, you get +1 energy next turn. And merges is like Hulkbuster, Agony, and Spider, which is a 3/3. On reveal, merge with one of your cards here. You can move that card next turn. So this is a Hulkbuster with a move bonus to it. And if Penny gets merged, presumably by this card or others like Agony or Hulkbuster, then you also get a nice +1 energy bonus. So kind of a lot going on here, right? You got like energy cheat, you got like movement synergy technically, and of course you got just like regular merge stuff as well. So there is like a line where you play like Agony on 1, and then you play Peni Parker on 2. And then, I mean, I guess you could play Spider on 3, but you'd have 4 energy on 3 because the Agony merge gave you +1 energy. Assuming, again, this works with all merges, which the wording indicates to me that it does. So I don't know, maybe there's like a Deadpool or something you play with a Spider. I don't know, whatever the case. And you got a Hulkbuster later. I don't know, you got some extra energy. All that said, I feel like this is going to be clunky, man. I feel like there's just too many moving pieces. Too much going on. None of these feel particularly efficient to play in their own right, and although the +1 energy does help in some ways, at the same time, it's sometimes hard to find the right moments for that to actually line up well when you're kind of just already playing a 2/3 and a 3/3 and these other merge cards, maybe if you want to get extra bonuses. So I don't know. Then there's like this move side of it. Like, is it worth to like put this on a Human Torch? And you know, it's like, okay, my Human Torch is up to 4, and then I can move it myself. I don't think so, because you got to play a 2/3 first. It's just, again, there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of parts go into that, and it's like, I'd rather just play Madam Web or something, you know, and all the cheap move stuff. So I don't think as a move enabler this is great. It's more like, you know, just kind of a bonus that makes this better than a Hulkbuster, I guess. And like whatever you hit, it being able to move is kind of cool, even like a Deadpool, you know. Okay, hit the Deadpool, and then I moved it somewhere the opponent didn't expect, and that, you know, suddenly the Cosmo they're playing is, you know, ineffectual, and I just play the Venom over here. Again, it's like, it's kind of nice, like I can see use cases, but it's just a lot of stuff, and I think a lot of energy commitment for all of that, and I don't know if the upsides here are worth it. So I don't know, there's nothing wrong with this card. I just know we've had these kind of things in the past where the more pieces of the puzzle you gotta weave in and line up and get it all to work well, it often just isn't worth it, you know. And it's like, okay, I didn't hit an Agony, that's you know, Peni Parker just got a lot worse, or, you know, where's my Hulkbuster, I only have the Spider, and it's like, well, that wasn't very good. So I think this card could be pushed a little bit. Like, could Spider just be a 3/4? Is it really got to be a 3/3? Maybe that would help get that little extra distance necessary to make this card intriguing. But as it stands, I think kind of clunky. All right, so moving on to our next card, it's Iron Patriot. I think this starts the January season of stuff. It's a 2/3. On reveal, add a random 4, 5, or 6-cost card to your hand. And then if you're winning here after next turn, give it -4 cost. So you've got here kind of a shield generator style card, adding some random stuff to hand. But then also this discount bonus if you do commit to that location and momentum, and you know, you have like a big 3-drop to follow this up, like a Juggernaut to follow this up, right? You could get a nice discount getting a 0 cost 4-drop, a 1 cost 5-drop, or a 2 cost 6-drop, all of which of course feel like they're going to be pretty good. There are clearly low rolls and scenarios where, you know, you're going to get something that's not particularly useful for your deck. You know, you get like a Dracula or something, and it's maybe hard for you to get value out of that Dracula reliably. But other times you'll get absolutely nutty stuff. Just, you know, giant 6-cost card that's amazing. I get a, you know, 2-cost Arnim Zola and make a monster play with my Devil Dinosaur because I'm a shield deck or whatever. And you're like, yes, dude, this was absolutely insane. And I will say, like, it's a pretty low upfront risk for these kind of high rolls. You know, stuff like Emperor Hulkling, you have to commit that entire slot in your deck, and it's like, if he doesn't hit, man, he's just kind of a dead card in hand. Iron Patriot, you're probably not too mad just playing out a 2-3, particularly because worst case scenario, it's adding a card to your hand, which can be beneficial for stuff like a Devil Dinosaur. If you have this kind of payoff, we're going to take a look at another card too that can actually help this even further. So, you know, the downside risk on this isn't too bad because it's cheap, it's flexible, you weave it in. Now, the consistency of hitting this on turn 3 and how that plays into building out a deck, that's a bit more of a question. Like, does this deck want to play Agent Coulson on turn 3, for instance? How reliably does that win a spot? Maybe more than you think. If you like play this far right and the opponent hasn't played there and you play Coulson on 3, like that's going to be 7 power. It's hard to beat 7 power from thin air with a 3-drop if the opponent's trying to contest this. So you may not even have to commit like a big Gladiator or a Juggernaut or whatever that really tries to force this. It might be okay to just kind of play the shield stuff and pick your targets as far as locations go and still get some good results. So all of that said, you know, this is kind of a low overhead card that probably just works better than you think and might even work well outside of a shield deck because the upside on this is so freaking high. Could this be one of those generic 2-drops you just toss into a tempo deck because you're really good at tempo, you're really good at building out those turn 3 location wins, and then you have this occasional game-winning payoff? Yeah, I think that's absolutely a possibility, but this could also be sort of a, you know, front man for shield stuff, which we're going to look at here even more of in a second. Yeah, that said, let's go ahead and talk about Victoria Hand. She is another 2-3. With ongoing, your cards created in your hand have +2 power, and that means stuff added directly to hand, like with your Iron Patriot, like with your Agent Coulson, like with your Agent 13, like with your Nick Fury, and so on. Those are all going to have +2 power thanks to Victoria Hand. It does mean stuff added directly to deck, like I guess Mjolnir hammers or whatever, should not based on this wording, because it does say created in your hands, not in your deck. So really pushing that shield sort of thing. And I like this card a lot because it's good even as a follow-up because of this ongoing text. With like Collector, for instance, you have to play Collector early and he has to be there to see all of this stuff getting added to hand. Victoria Hand does not. By the way, Hand is such a good name for this card. Like I know that's like her real name, but I'm saying like good effect for this name. Anyway, she can come down like on turn 6, and because she's an ongoing, it's still going to give +2 power to those cards. She didn't need to see it happen. It's just going to work. Those cards were created in hand, even if they were created before she sees it or before she's on board, they were created in hand. They're going to have +2 power. So it's nice that you can play this later, particularly with Iron Patriot. Like that's a card you want to get down on too, probably as soon as possible to try to ensure you can reliably win those locations and get that discount. So, you know, Collector kind of clashes with that in a way. You can't play Collector and Iron Patriot on 2. That's not a good clean line. Victoria Hand can come in later and still do some work. So ultimately, again, a pretty nice payoff here. And if you've got, you know, even just 2 or 3 cards that you've generated in this way and you're playing them out, like, man, that's a +6 on this. That makes this a nice output. And for that kind of deck, you probably need stuff like this to make it worth it. And I do too like that this card rewards you for playing the stuff you're making, whereas Collector doesn't really care if you play it. Like that always felt like, you know, it wasn't as fun, basically. Like Collector just wanted to see it get made and he didn't care if it hit the board. This card cares if it hits the board, and it's more fun to play through some of that random generation stuff. Perhaps frustrating to opponents, being a bit unpredictable, but at the end of the day, you know, this is all feeling like a nice little, like, you know, Quinjet, Iron Patriot, Agent Coulson, play some of that stuff, you know, that's all discounted, and then follow up with Victoria Hand, and this is a nice surprising boost in power. In essence, this is probably like, you know, a 2.9 or a 2.11 in some cases in total output because of this buff. If you're able to play particularly like small things, the more small things, the better for this one. So ultimately, pretty cool little card here. I like the design on this one surprisingly well. So moving on, it's Toxie Doxie. That is a weird name. 2/4 on reveal, draw a card. You can't play cards next turn. So yet another card draw card here with a notable downside. And this is interesting because Second Dinner, the Marvel Snap team, has always been really cautious around card draw. They've said as much, and we can see it in the game too. Crystal's always been super bad card. They don't want to give too much card draw to players because decks are small, and you know, if you just draw a bunch of cards, you're just always going to draw your entire deck, which can have some risks for like achieving combo consistency, but also just might make games feel too samey because everybody's just always getting all their cards. So I understand that hesitation a little bit, but at the same time, man, it's just like there's no card draw, and it's always really bad. And I think this card looks really bad to me as well. But then you've also got Nico that just draws 2 cards, and it's really not that much of a downside. So it's like, man, they made Nico's card draw insane. That really hasn't felt like too big of a problem. It's obviously really good in destroy decks, but it's not like a meta warping sort of thing necessarily. But then this comes along, and to me, it just looks really bad again. Like, if you play this on turn 2, maybe it's not so bad. Like, skip a turn 3 or whatever. It's not the biggest, you know, skip. But anytime beyond that, this is just, like, unplayable to me. Like, you know, you just can't play this. Like, maybe sort of on, like, turn 4, and you skip turn 5 for a She-Hulk Infinite turn 6 or something. Like, I have some thoughts there. And, you know, Sunspot. And we just saw, like, Bruce Banner, like, you know, skipping energy or whatever. There's like some of that, but it's just to draw a card. I don't think drawing a card is really that big of a benefit that it'd even be worth it. Like, okay, well, I got the She-Hulk and Infinite because I played the Toxie Doxie. Like, okay, that's going to happen so often anyway. So you really want to run this in a deck that like has to hit a specific combo. So, you know, like Living Tribunal, for instance, really has to hit. They need Tribunal. They have to have Tribunal or the deck just doesn't work, right? So this could kind of increase the consistency of something like a Living Tribunal deck. But even skipping turn 3 in a Tribunal deck is actually pretty punishing because that's often the turn you want to play like Magic, for instance. That deck often wants to play Magic, and you can't. So it's like, ah, man, when do I play this? If it's not turn 2, it's awful. And even if it is turn 2 in a lot of those combo decks, it still may be awful. They still have setup they need to do and cards they need to play. And it's like, well, I couldn't play my Ravonna, so now I missed Ravonna because I played Toxie. And it's like, I don't know, man. I think the downside on this is just too severe, and the upside of drawing a card is just not significant enough. If this is like a Spotlight cash card, it is going to be tough to make a video that week, man. I don't know what I'll do. Hopefully this is like one of those bonus cards in like an event or something. It'll still be tough to make a video, but won't take up a whole week. So I am just not a fan of this one. So next up, this card's really cool. Ares, he is a 4/6 on reveal. Compare the power of the top 3 cards of both decks. If your total is higher, +6 power. So this is like Joust from like 9 years ago in Hearthstone, from anybody who remembers that, the Joust effect. But it's pretty cool, actually. I like this, right? So he goes up to 412 if that hits. 412 is awesome. That's big. We got Surtur everywhere in the meta right now. This could be a great Surtur card, for instance. Particularly because Surtur is running a lot of big stuff in their deck already. And very often, you know, if you're hitting like 20, 25 power off your top 3 cards, because you got like a couple 10 power things in your deck for Surtur, that is going to beat most decks. Most decks have, you know, a couple big things max and often run like a bunch of small stuff. You run into Agent Venoms, you're going to get 12 power out of the deck always. A deck built around this is reliably going to beat those sort of numbers. I'd say the average deck's results are going to be like 10 to 15 power on average, maybe occasionally up to 20. But, you know, yours might be hitting 20, 25, 30 range for a big deck that runs Ares. And I think that makes this a cool option for those big committed decks like that, to just roll with it and get a nice 412. It's just a little bit bigger than something like a Typhoid Mary, a little bit bigger than a Tuma, and probably a downside that's less of a factor as well. That said, you know, if it is a Surtur package specifically, if this did whiff, it could kind of break the entire game plan. So is that 2 extra power worth the, like, you know, 1 in 10 risk or whatever where the game falls apart? I venture it might be, because, you know, those games you just retreat for 1 anyway. It's not that big of a deal if it whiffs and it ruins things for you. And frankly, a 4/6 is not a total disaster either. sometimes that's enough to get by. So I think this is just enough of a bonus here as a 412 to be a pretty interesting card, and I like big dumb stat decks like this, so this card's right up my alley. Moving on to Gorgon, new 2/3 with ongoing. Your opponent's cards that didn't start in their deck cost 1 more up to a maximum of 6, so nothing becomes unplayable. And yeah, I mean, this seems like a tech card for Arishem, right? Or maybe the like Iron Patriot stuff, since this seems to be coming out in the same month. Is like, well, look, maybe Shield stuff's going to be too good. Let's make sure people have an answer to that sort of thing. You know, if you're going to be getting all these awesome generated cards that are discounted, well, they're not discounted anymore. In fact, they might be too expensive. And of course, Arishem decks, like half their draws, or even more than half their draws, are going to be much, much worse. They're going to have that bonus energy, but now they're going to need the bonus energy to play the stuff on curve instead of cheating it out a little bit early. So kind of an interesting tech card. Now that said, tech cards like this, they're not usually that popular. You know, that deck that it's targeting has to be really, really prominent for this to be worth it, because so often it's not going to be very good. And you can't really influence this too much outside of maybe like, you know, a master mold sort of thing where you're giving your opponent a bunch of junk, master mold and Black Widow, all these cards going into hand, and then it's harder for the opponent to dump them because you've laid down the Gorgon first. That's the one sort of proactive way I can figure out to use the Gorgon. I don't know that it would even be worth it necessarily in that package, but it might be a free ad. I think that's more reliable and still not a great use case than the tech card option. Like, people will probably run this as a tech card, but it probably won't be worth it most of the time, frankly. It's just like, what are the odds you hit an Arishem? Even today, like, Arishem's still pretty common, but it's like 1 in 5 matches, 1 in 7 matches or something. You're running a card for 1 in 7 of your matches. I don't think that's going to be worth it. So perhaps the shield stuff will take off and this will have a brief moment in the sun, but I think it's one of those that kind of falls to the wayside pretty quickly after that fact, and may not be worth it. Maybe toss it in a Spectrum deck, maybe toss it in Master Mold. That's kind of it, the ceiling for this card as far as I'm concerned. So next up, this is Moonstone, a 4/5 ongoing, has the ongoing effects of your 1, 2, and 3 cost cards here, which I think this is honestly pretty cool and maybe scary. I don't know. I've seen other people reacting to this card, maybe not as highly as me, but there's some good ongoing effects. Namely, Mystique is a 3-cost ongoing card, which can copy any ongoing effect, right? I could see a world where you play this on 4, and then you play Iron Man on 5, and then you play Mystique on the Moonstone, and you've suddenly got like a double Iron Man there, plus, you know, Ant-Man or whatever else you've managed to squeeze into that location earlier in the game. And there's some interesting stuff happening there because of the Mystique specifically. But then there's also stuff like, I don't know, Cerebro, right? It's a 3-cost ongoing. Patriot is a 3-cost ongoing. So could this be a way to juice up, you know, a Patriot or Cerebro deck without, you know, needing the Mystique timing, which can be weird, and without having the Mystique low power output, which is often weird, you know, like it's a 3/0. That's really bad sometimes. But a 4/5 feels good. For only 1 extra energy, you're getting 5 extra power. That is efficient, and you know, it's not limited either, because there's other cards that could go there as well. Could a Zoo deck use this with like Dazzler and Ant-Man? You know, maybe not so good because, you know, you got like Blue Marvel and Kazar don't fit into this package, but still some stuff that lines up with it. So I don't know, man. I feel like Mystique already makes me really, really intrigued by this card. Does it go in Living Tribunal decks? I'm thinking like, my God, I don't know. Maybe it does because of the Mystique. That could be kind of cool. And then, you know, Cerebro 5, I'm intrigued by it. So I will say it's like very specific, and it is very like, you know, susceptible to an Enchantress, all of your stuff stacking up in one spot. Enchantress just wipes it all out, obviously. But I'm seeing angles for this one where it can make some really big plays, and, you know, multiplying 3 effects in 1 card. That is a recipe for some big numbers and some crazy stuff. So I'm keeping an eye on this one, man. I think this card actually has a lot of potential. All right, so our final card here is Bullseye. He is reworked a lot since the last time we saw him. He's now a 4/5, activate, discard all cards that cost 1 or less from your hand, afflict that many different enemy cards with -2 power, which this seems kind of scary to me, actually. Number one, I really like that it's activate. Gives you a ton of flexibility on the timing of this one, which can be really important. maybe even saving it up for the end of the game. But I'm imagining some hands where this is a really spooky kind of effect. Number one is like Scorn, of course, you know, great one cost thing you're happy to discard anytime, always. There's like X23, there's the Dakin Shard, which can be sometimes tough to discard. So there you go. It's like, not only am I doubling up Dakin's power, but I'm also getting this nice -2 affliction each time I hit one of these. So Scorn is +2 on one of mine, -2 on one of theirs, right? The Dakin Shard is +4 on my Dakin, -2 on them, right? It's suddenly a lot of stats stacking up. There's also stuff like Swarms. You can push the Swarms down to 0. Discard a couple Swarms, right? And then it's like, man, okay, I got -4 power because of Bullseye already, and now I've also got extra Swarms in my hand that I can play down as 3 power. You know, you do this like on turn 5, play the Swarms on turn 6 or whatever. There's a lot of interesting little lines. You could even have, like, you know, a bunch of Swarms in hand and then just do this at the end to buff like a Collector or whatever that's getting bigger as you add all of those Swarms to hand. So it's not just like a payoff where you're getting all these -2 power afflictions. It's also sometimes an activator for the like Collector hand and the Scorns and stuff as well. So it's doing dual duty, and it's already 5 power to baseline. So, you know, you get 3 or 4 afflictions out of this. You're talking about another 6 or 8 power on top of this 5. That's an 11 power card, a 13 power card. You talk about the bonuses that the discards offer you. We talked about another +2 on a Scorn, some Swarm bodies. You're talking about a card that's putting out 20, 25 power in a lot of scenarios and game states if you build your deck toward it, which isn't necessarily always better than like a Dracula, because that can also put out like 20 or 25 power for a 4-drop, but it's different, and it gives you an extra enabler, which is what I said. It's not just a payoff, but it's an enabler. Dracula's not that so much. So this can also be a buff to your Morbius and stuff too. It's like, man, I don't know. This feels like a really cool engine in a discard deck. I feel like it does a lot. And I think the activate timing is really cool too. So I see a lot of big potential on this card. I think this actually looks kind of scary good. It just takes a little bit of deck refinement to make this work. And then I'm scared it's going to work almost too well. Yeah, all right. So that's all the cards. Now let's rank these from best to worst, which there's so many, I don't even know where to start. My number 1 card is Doom 2099. My number 2 card is Galacta. Number 3 is Bullseye. Number 4 is Rocket, Raccoon, and Groot. Number 5 is Ares. Number 6 is Moonstone. Number 7 is Iron Patriot. Number 8 is Victoria Hand. Number 9 is Luna Snow. Number 10 is Peni Parker. Number 11 is Gorgon. Number 12 is Bruce Banner. Number 13 is Toxie Doxie. Also last for the quality for name. Yeah, and there you go. My God, that's so many freaking cards. Curious to hear what you guys think about all of these cards. Share all your thoughts down in the comments below. Which ones are you excited to get? Which ones are you excited to build decks around? Which one are you going to use your spotlight keys on? I want to hear all those thoughts and more. And as always, of course, thank you much for joining me in this super long, crazy video. Glad we get to see some leaked cards once again.